First and foremost, thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining us today for what I am hoping is a very inspiring conversation and a very encouraging conversation. We would like to welcome everyone to our LENA webinar, Collaborating on Quality, brought to you in partnership between LENA and Teachstone. Today's conversation is about strategies for improving quality teacher-child interactions and, as a result, class scores and child outcomes. It's also about how educators can integrate complementary tools like CLASS, the observational assessment, and LENA Grow, the professional development program. We have an amazing panel that deeply understands the value of both classroom quality assessments and professional development. And we are really excited to explore the potential value of what happens when those tools complement each other. We recognize that in our educational space, there are many tools that can be used. And so this conversation hopes to bring some value and some understanding to when you're choosing tools intentionally that really complement each other. I am Dominique McCain, President and CEO for Educational First Steps, an early education nonprofit that supports increased access to high quality early childhood programming across the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I joined Educational First Steps to support the early childhood and childcare space as the next frontier in my quest to ensure student access to high quality instruction and effective teachers and leaders. I started my career as a middle school teacher, so at some point I considered myself to be one of those effective teachers and leaders. But EFS, Educational First Steps, supports a network of childcare providers that are committed to high quality programming and data-informed continuous improvement. Both LENA and CLASS are tools that me and my staff use in our strategy to ensure school readiness through high quality childcare programming and early educator quality. Just a little bit of information about me so you understand, where I'm coming from and entering the space. I'm also very happy to introduce our panel to you. We have Dr. Veronica Fernandez. She is the Vice President of Impact at Teachstone. She's an expert in leveraging assessment tools like CLASS to drive meaningful improvements in educator practice and child outcomes. With over 20 years of experience in early childhood education, she has served as a preschool teacher, pedagogical director, and university faculty. At the University of Miami, she used the CLASS tool to design, implement, and evaluate interventions that strengthened adult-child interactions and helped ensure all children experience equitable, high-quality early learning experiences. Dr. Veronica Fernandez. I'd also like to introduce you all to Leisha Bookbinder. Leisha Bookbinder is the CEO of the Early Learning Coalition of Lake County. She oversees the implementation of child care resource and referral, school readiness, VPK, and Help Me Grow programs in Lake County, Florida. The coalition contracts with child care providers, offering professional development opportunities, technical assistance, and support for class assessments and quality initiatives, including LENA Grow. Welcome, Leisha Bookbinder. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez is Senior Associate Director at Youth Development, Inc. in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In addition to overseeing the Early Childhood Division content areas, she is also responsible for all promising practices and activities, including LENA. This year marks her 30th year in the field of early care and education. Thank you so much for your work, Dr. Rodriguez, and welcome to our panel. So we'll go ahead and get started. To start us off, would each of you please share how do you define a high quality interaction? And can you share from your experience, why do these everyday moments between teachers and children matter so much for children's learning and development? Anybody can go first.
All right, I'm going to go ahead. Again, Leisha with the Coalition. Thanks for having me, Dominique. I think a high quality interaction is times when the teachers are engaged, they're attentive, and they're purposeful in their interaction with the child. The interaction is rich and warm with encouragement, curiosity, and I think that fosters a sense of belonging and safety. I think in early childhood, learning is relational. So I think children thrive when they feel connected. And that high quality interaction is a heartbeat of that connection.
Thank you, Leisha.
I'll jump in. I kind of boiled it down to three pieces. And the first one, and it's really consistent with what my colleague also explained, The first one is really thinking about when I walk into a classroom, I want to see teachers and children actively engaged in the moment. And that, and that's part of what, when I go into a classroom and I do a class observation, there's something similar to that also is, immediately when you walk in, kind of what that classroom feels like. The second is really thinking about the role of the adult. And I often think about them as being a catalyst for learning. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the teacher is always engaged with every single child, because of course that's impossible. But really thinking about that the adult really knows the children well enough that as the adult in the room, they know what their role is, because children learn differently. And then the third piece is really being able to see this trust that's developed between the children and the adult. So for learning purposes, sometimes we have children who they might be reluctant or a little reticent to take a risk to maybe try something new, but it's really about the adult knowing about that. But I have to confess, all of those pieces are really influenced about with my understanding and my long history of using class.
Happy to jump in. And I just want to say ditto to what you both just said. When we think about high quality interactions, we're talking about those back and forth exchanges, typically between educators and children, and they help children feel known, supported, and challenged. And it's one where the educator is tuned in and noticing if a child is expressing a desire, is curious about something, and when the educator is responding in a way that extends children's thinking and is providing that connection through those interactions. And I think that really matters because development happens through co-construction, right? Children learn more when they're actively participating with someone, typically an adult, who is genuinely interested in what they think, what they're trying to do, and shaping who they are. The research on it is incredibly consistent, right? When children experience warmth and responsive interactions, and it's paired with rich back and forth communication, we see so much growth in their development. And so this is what is really at the core of effective high quality interactions.
Thank you all so very much for that. Everything you said, I concur with. And I always tell people interactions are going to happen, whether we like it or not. Why not ensure that they're high quality? Let's talk about quality a little bit more, friends. The question is I'm going to start with you, Veronica.
Okay.
Class is known to many as the standard for assessing teacher-child interactions. Can you explain the very basics of what class is, and then more generally talk about what we're really looking for in the quality of those interactions?
Sure. When we talk about class, oftentimes people's mind immediately goes to improving scores, right? It's even in the title of this webinar. And that makes sense. Scores matter, right? They give us a shared research-based way to understand and strengthen the interactions that children in our care are experiencing. But here's the thing, class scores actually improve as a byproduct of focusing on what matters most, which is the interactions, right? And I don't mean that we ignore the scores. I just mean that it's important to understand what they represent. So with class, we support the quality of those interactions, how educators connect with children to build warm, trusting relationships, how they engage and intentionally meet children's interests and hold their attention, and how they inspire thinking, right? By fostering curiosity, problem solving, and language development. And all of that within the context of playful, joyful learning environment. And for educators to do that consistently and confidently, they need support. So when educators have what they deserve, which is things like access to high quality resources, professional development opportunities, supportive adult-adult relationships, so other teachers, families, coaches, supervisors, as well as meaningful feedback and time to plan and reflect, then they can focus on those day-to-day interactions that shape children's learning and development. So, when teachers are supported, they're more likely to engage in effective interactions and ensure that children thrive, and class captures all of that.
Thank you. Great, great segue to our next question. And I'm coming over to you, Patricia. You've worked directly with teachers using class and with teachers participating in LENA Grow. Can you help us understand what LENA Grow is? And then what does it look like when a teacher starts connecting what they see in a class observation with what they hear in their LENA feedback?
Sure. So in our program, we've been implementing LENA Grow. This is our 4th year. Those 5 weeks, both the first 5 weeks and then the second 5 weeks, are really designed as a coaching model. And so that coaching model is the basic premise is that the LENA coaching model is an opportunity to help teachers further develop their skills to be able to increase the number of back and forth exchanges that the children experience while they're in the center. And in addition to that, we want not only more back and forth exchanges, but we also want teachers to talk more to children. And so when I think about the words that I use when I'm talking to teachers about it, when I say, it's about making certain that you're talking about what you're doing as you're doing it. If you're doing it at a table activity, it's also about making certain that as when you're watching with children or you're working with a group of children, that you're talking with them about what they're doing also, so they can hear that richer environment. And I often use the word, make certain that you're including that 50-cent vocabulary words, that words that just naturally come out of science activities. So it's a 5-week intervention, focus on increasing back and forth exchanges, increasing language. That data is uploaded onto the very sophisticated LENA website and the platform, and then it's analyzed for us automatically. And then there's a printout, it's a report that is used as the basis of a discussion that a LENA coach has with teachers. And so teachers are able to get feedback within a couple of days about what was the amount of language that each of those children had in the classroom. So it's
Thank you.
immediate feedback. And
Yeah.
so just a wonderful, wonderful way to support teachers.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I think that goes very well with the next question, which I have for you, Leisha, which really does center on the teachers. Thinking about how teachers learn, how they respond to observational data, what helps teachers take ownership of the data and make real lasting changes in how they integrate quality interactions in the classroom?
So, Patricia, you touched on talking to your teachers about what LENA Grow is, about really measuring how much they talk to children. And so when we first launched LENA Grow, we actually did 2 cycles, a little bit further back, 2019, but did it again more recently in 23. And when I have those conversations with teachers about LENA Grow, they're like, well, of course I talk to kids. Of course I talk in the classroom, right? It's almost like those who think they're going to talk the most are the ones that talk the least. And those who think they don't talk at all, use all the words. And so I think the key with data really, when we start getting these real-time reports, I mean, after a LENA day, those teachers are seeing those results within about 24 to 48 hours from that LENA day, and making those teachers feel safe about that data. I think when teachers feel respected and supported, they're really willing to move forward with looking at their environment, their practice, and engage with the data to make significant changes. I think that in ensuring that teachers can understand it and they know really what it means, looking at the times of the day where there's not a lot of words versus the ones where there's a ton of words. When we first started, we had to remind teachers not to take the vest off or turn the devices off at nap time, because we said, listen, some kids don't nap and you're talking to them the whole time. And so it's really just important that they feel connected to the data. And both on our coaching, our class coaches, as well as our LENA Grow coaches, it's about relationships. I think relationships are so critically important, that those teachers can feel safe when they're having these coaching sessions and really think about what they can do to make change. I think we empower these teachers with this data. They're able to make choices about their programs, and they can personalize what their programs are going to look like and what their days are going to look like. And that's very motivating.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We'll go a little bit deeper. I will just simply just double click on the value of data in a teacher's practice and in that space. And I think what's really important, specifically for this conversation, is we're talking about data points that aren't typically measured, right? We're talking about actually having real metrics in teachers' hands to inform their practice. So here's my next question. We've established that class is valuable for the understanding of the level of quality of interactions. We also know, based on what you guys have shared, LENA can be so valuable for increasing these interactions, and in LENA's terminology, these conversational terms. Here's my question for you guys. Specifically, I'm going to start with you, Veronica. From Teachstone's vantage point, what teacher supports have you found to work best when they're tightly connected to class? And how might tools like LENA Grow enhance that feedback loop?
Thank you for that. I'll start actually with what's most common, but not as effective as we would like and insufficient. So a lot of support for educators tends to focus on suggesting strategies or teaching a concept. And strategies are helpful, but on their own, they're not going to lead to that sustained change in practice that we really want. And so, what we've seen in the research is that educators improve the most when they receive frequent, specific feedback about their practice, and that it's particularly effective when that feedback is grounded in a clear framework like class. You said it a few minutes ago, Leisha, that educators deserve feedback that is encouraging, that is actionable, that makes them feel like what they're doing is important, helps them make small but meaningful shift that makes sense for them and their context, right? Personalized to their approach, their curriculum, their children, the families that they serve, their cultural backgrounds, and all of that. And personalized and specific feedback can also help to ensure that interactions are equitable, right? Because in the moment, as you said, Leisha, the ones who you think are going to talk maybe don't talk as much. We may not notice which children are getting the most out of us as educators, right? Who's getting the most back and forth exchanges? Whose questions are we following up on? Who might be hanging back quietly without a chance to share? And it's especially important for children who are learning more than one language, children who communicate differently or have a disability, because every child deserves to be seen, heard, and be fully engaged and benefit from their early learning environment. So to loop back to my original point, feedback is a step up from just knowledge building, but it's even that is not always enough. It works best within a more comprehensive context of support, but that's a whole other cognitive and behavioral psychology conversation for another webinar.
And so I'm going to go to the next question, which is for you, Leisha. In your experience, what's the value in integrating tools like Class and LENA Grow? And can you share an example where teachers' class scores or daily interactions visibly improved once they began receiving feedback from both Class and LENA?
Absolutely. I'm a self-declared data nerd, so I think that's why I get all these data questions. So we could have a whole nother webinar on the data side of LENA and class and what that's capturing and what those reports mean. LENA Grow and class are very powerful together. And I think, you know, in the state of Florida, class is one of those measures that we use for our contracted providers, both our school readiness providers and our VPK providers. And so that is something that is in all of our classrooms that provide services through early learning coalitions. And so we do those coaching sessions, but LENA Grow really kind of just emphasizes, as Veronica said, those pieces that we normally, and Patricia commented, that we normally don't capture, and how that integrates into those class days which is every day, right? When I think of an example of one of our providers and how we saw some growth, I went back to our coaching sessions and really looked at some of our coaching comments. And what I found was we had this one classroom. It was a 2-year-old classroom, and this was our third LENA day. And it was our very first opportunity in LENA Grow. So they had not done it before. And she was very excited about LENA Grow. She was very receptive to the coaching. She had these great ideas, and this is her third day. And part of the days, what we talk about is give us a positive for the day. And on that coaching day, she was not feeling too positive. She was kind of under the weather and not feeling very well. But she said, you know what, here was a positive. And in her classroom, in her 2-year-old classroom, she was working on that LENA day, was working on 3 to 5 word sentences. And one of the children, not a LENA Grow participant, right, because it's volunteers. So this child was not participating in LENA Grow, but the child completed the sentence. And when she said, what did you say? The child said it again. And completely again. And for her, that coaching, even though this child was not participating in LENA Grow, the whole class benefited from that coaching session. So whether those children are participating or not participating, we encourage all of our kids to get a vest, even though there might not be a device in it, because it's like our hero cape. And so they're all going to get a vest, even though one may not be turned on or not have a device. But she was super excited. And that day was the biggest turn. There was 40 conversational turns per child. Per hour. It was a fantastic day, their highest scoring LENA day. When we looked at their class scores, the class score before, the observation actually happened about 45 days before LENA started. And then we had our LENA 5-week sequence. And then the next class score, we saw an increase of 5.67% in the overall class score. And that's not every time. And so when we look at our class data, it did not show that there's these big differences between LENA Grow and non-LENA Grow. But what we did see is an 18% increase in domains like language modeling, which is huge. And so though we're not seeing these big gains in class scores, we are seeing those so important gains in language modeling and facilitation and of the language development. And in that domain for this classroom, they went from a 3 to a 4.75 from the first class observation to the one that occurred after LENA Grow. So clearly the data is there that shows that domains are impacted, but it really is about relationship building and making sure teachers feel confident with the data. And we're using it as a growth tool and not an evaluation tool. And I know that's hard in states where we're using these tools as a requirement, if you will, but when it comes to teachers, showing them that this is a way to grow their classrooms and kind of take away that evaluation piece is great, and that's what makes the most long-standing changes.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just want to say, it's always great when something that is required actually helps you grow, because many things are required that do not help you grow. Let
Amen.
me go to you, Patricia. Like, we're hearing how complementary these tools are, but we'd really also love to get into the logistics of it all, right? So knowing that it can be challenging to manage assessment tools and integrate professional development programs, how do you approach coordinating across coaching, administrators, teachers, so the data actually becomes very actionable at every level? We'd love to hear from you on this, Patricia.
So one of the pieces that I think that there were 2 pieces that I think are really critical. One is we were already doing class as a measurement. We were already using class as a measurement of quality. And so it was much easier to just layer on LENA on top of that, because the language of class and LENA are very complementary. So that was one of the pieces that we found. We didn't want our staff to go, one more thing. So it was really figuring out how to link those together. The other piece of this, and this was so critical, we had been doing practice-based coaching for my Head Start colleagues. We know what that was, but it wasn't effective for us. So what we did is we made sure that the coach, who was new to Head Start, but had been a toddler teacher in a high quality local program, that we found somebody who had good organizational skills, who really understood the importance of PD. She's really the one who manages the integration of all of these pieces. In addition, the first thing that we did was we made certain that she's a class observer. So when she goes in, she uses LENA language, but she integrates it with class language. So those were two for us. Those were the two important pieces. Third, and probably most important, is I don't know how many informational meetings we had about LENA, and starting with administrators, then going to classroom teachers, to every single work stream. And that deck that we used, it was constantly integrating class with LENA. So it just made it easier for teachers to understand. And we use that when we think about professional development, when we're planning like pre-services and in-service. It's the integration, not one more thing, just complementary.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to commend you for that work, because when the leaders do that work, then the teachers can focus on what is most important for their work, right? I'm going to open this next question up to all of you. Um, how do you create the conditions for using complementary tools? In essence, making sure that programs see class and LENA grow as two sides of the same improvement coin. And anybody can jump out and answer that, but just really want to understand, how are you guys creating those conditions for programs?
I'll just start by saying funding is important. Really providing the ability to have these resources in the classroom. But I think once they learn, for us, for Lake, when they learned about LENA and saw those, how they did complement each other, it really was a no-brainer. But for us, we made sure we had the funding to put it in the classroom. And then we did try to think about ways to do teacher stipends or classroom kits. If we're doing a training on class, we're going to make sure we purchase those resources for providers, because it's so important to have the materials in the rooms as well. I know we're talking about conversational turns, but having the age-appropriate materials in the room is critical in these classrooms. And so those are not always available to providers. They may not have the funding for that. And so where we can, partnering with organizations or partnering with local communities to provide resources and the funds to implement these programs, I think is the key for us.
I'll jump in. We thought about who could, if this worked, and we made the assumption, if this worked, which teachers would be our champions? Which ones were the one that would be sitting in pre-service or in service, that if we decided to move forward, who we could say, would you help us co-present? Because we have these natural teacher leaders. And so those are really important pieces of this work.
The only thing I would add is that admins and educators already are juggling so much. So I would just say that the key is simplicity. One story about growth. Class helps us understand the interactions that matter most, and tools like LENA or other improvement initiatives can help educators see their progress in real time. And so when everything is pointing to strengthening those everyday moments with children, it just tells a more cohesive story about growth.
Yeah, I'm going to add one small tidbit, and this is actually my perspective as a CEO and leader for both Teachstone and the LENA team, and how they're creating the conditions. Things like ensuring that you have flexible cost models, which both of these entities have, right? Making these tools and resources more accessible, because to Leisha's point, it does cost money, right? And so I think two things have been critical for me and my team in the use of these materials, and it's that accessibility in terms of cost, and then also having such a strong body of research that supports us as leaders in being able to defend why these are our choices, right? Both the complementary aspects of them, but also very much the access to data and how teachers can be improved in their practice as a result of using it. There are tons of things we could buy out there, right? But very few of them are actually giving us sound data, sound research, and actionable, really quick, turnkey, right, improvement. And so I would just name that as the thing I'd say continues to enable us to do this work. And so thank you all. Let's go to the next question. We'll talk about sustainability a little bit. Obviously, just by exploring how we can integrate multiple programs, We're not looking at a one size fits all scenario ever, right? So, how do we ensure that this kind of integrated approach works across diverse contexts, including programs with limited resources or even high staff turnover? I'm going to start with you, Leisha, and then I'm coming to you, Patricia.
Thanks. I think it's a great question. And I think it's important to look at it with a strength-based approach, right? And be mindful of what's already in the classroom. You know, Veronica talked about making it simple, you know, one story about quality. And I think that's important because I think Patricia talked about, didn't want to pile one more thing on. And that's sometimes with our programs, that's what it feels like. It's like, oh, I now have to do that and I have to do that. And so I think finding what's working in those classrooms and then making sure those teachers feel supported before you roll out, a new program. Is it going to complement the current programs? Is it going to complement the work? Does the teacher feel supported? Are they ready for it? Are they excited about it? Because I think it's important to really gauge the teachers and what they want for that classroom and make sure they are ready for the implementation of these new tools, strategies, before they're just kind of thrown into the classroom. I think that's sustainable, right? Teachers now can get excited about the work. They see the difference through the data, and they want to continue it. And when we talk about this, there's a chance when they're supported, they're not going to turn over, high staff turnover, right? They feel supported. Sometimes we know that because of pay or other reasons, we have a lot of high turnover. And so when teachers feel supported and connected, it's not always about how much they're making per hour. It's about what support resources do they have at the center? Do they feel connected? Do they feel important to the overall work of that center and into those children's lives? And as you build that relationship and you make them feel respected and supported, then I think that's where that sustainable teacher stays, and those programs can be successful.
Thank you. Patricia, is there anything you'd add?
We are very fortunate. YDI is very fortunate to have a strong relationship with the Kellogg Foundation. And so when we started on down the LENA journey, we started having some conversations with the Kellogg Foundation person from the state of New Mexico. So the opportunity to have that additional money also provided us some flexibility to honor our teachers. So built into the curriculum is a celebration. We opted, rather than to do small celebrations with teachers, and the Kellogg Foundation allowed us to do this, is we make a really big deal about celebrating our teachers. We have a really fancy luncheon that's held at a local restaurant. We don't cater it in. We do it on pre-service days. It's those things that, just as my colleague Leisha said, it's not about how much the dollar, what their hourly is. It's about honoring them as teachers. So that was a big deal for us.
Thank you so much. And I love the idea of celebrating really good practice, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, Veronica, my question for you in this same vein is I'm curious about how programs can expand their use of interactions focused tools and how we can help teachers sustain gains in the time between evaluations or PD cycles. How do you think programs can essentially make quality interactions a sustainable part of their program's culture?
I love that word that you use, Dominique, culture, and it resonates with what Leisha and Patricia were just talking about, like how we value educators, right? So two primary things come to mind. First, you've likely heard people talk about the language and lens of class, but I think what truly drives change is the culture of class, that shared commitment to how we show up for children and for each other as adults. Sustainability, I think, happens when class isn't something we just think about during the evaluation windows, or you said class days, right? Somebody said that. But the foundation for daily interactions, because that's what children deserve every single day. And when everyone within a program, and that means educators, coaches, supervisors, leaders, is really intentional about their interactions, being supportive, not only with children, but with each other, that reinforces that program-wide culture at every level. And second, I think programs benefit from tools that support real-time feedback. When educators can see, and like you said, Patricia, celebrate their progress, not just in a luncheon, but even when they just get those data in their hands, right? Between the formal cycles of class, I think it helps to keep that momentum going, right? If there's a long time between your class observations and you're not getting information in between, you're sort of wondering, is what I'm doing working? Is it not? Is it making things better or worse? I don't know. And it can sometimes be subjective if it's just sort of like coming from the perspective of a coach's opinion, right? And they're not using a particular framework. Educators can, when a framework is used and when that feedback is provided, they can notice what's working and they can make small adjustments when it's not. And so when those two conditions, I think, come together, that program-wide culture grounded in class and ongoing feedback that supports growth, I think it helps educators feel confident and relationships stay at the center, and that just gives every child the opportunity to thrive.
I love that you talked about it as a part of culture. You know this, Veronica, because we've known each other for a while, but I'll share with those of you on the webinar, my entire staff is class trained, and that is intentional because what I've learned in my career, and I did classwork, I've done classwork a long time, is that when the adults are applying
Yep.
the same practices and behaviors with each other, the culture gets even more healthy and grounded, right? And so I just love that you shared that because, again, we don't want people feeling like these tools are things that they just have to do, right? Because we understand that the way this works is we embrace it, we adopt it, we practice it, and it's consistently reinforced. So I love that. We have reached the point in the webinar, guys, where we will get some questions from the audience. So let's see what we have. So one of the questions here is about LENA specifically. Does the device have the ability to measure quality of conversation, or is it more about quantity and frequency? Oh, that's a great question.
It does not measure the quality piece as far as, the sophistication of the language used. It is counting, for lack of a better word, blips. It is counting blips. But that's why class is so complementary for this. So you can get that in the instructional support piece if you're also using class.
Yep, and I'll add, when I first heard about Lena, and I was just so excited about this talk pedometer, I asked that question, like, well, does it measure negative talk? And like, no, it doesn't measure negative talk. And I said, well, what happens when the child is, the teacher's yelling at the child or demanding things, and the response, as you know, from Lena was, well, what happens when people yell at you, right? Kids will be reserved. They will not talk. They do not feel safe. They do not feel comfortable. So they won't talk, and that will show up, right? And there's other approaches to managing teachers, right? I think, Patricia, that class component is perfect, but that's what I'd ask. And so, but kids are going to talk, they're going to use their language and use their words, even their babbles. Those babies are going to babble, and that's a blip, and that gets counted back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They're going to do that when they feel comfortable and safe and secure. And that's what's important. That's what we want kids to feel in the classroom.
Thank you both. I'm going to paraphrase this next question because it's pretty long. It's like 3 different questions in one. Let me start with this one, and I think this one might be best for you to answer, Veronica. What is a realistic expectation or time frame to see growth and improvement in the class dimensions for educators that are new to the model?
That's a loaded question. I think it depends what you're doing, right? So I alluded a little bit around what's effective. Oftentimes, there's a lot of money spent on professional development to increase people's understanding and to give them sets of strategies that they might be able to use. But when those strategies are not personalized and educators are not provided opportunities to practice out of the action, I don't know about you, but I remember being in the classroom. It's been a while. My children are now in early childhood education age, but when I was in the classroom as a teacher, there's so much going on. So you go to this workshop, you learn a ton of things, you come back really excited, but you go back to business as usual because there's so much going on. You're sort of feeling like you're putting out fires and there's a million things happening at the same time and you're really just trying to get through the day. So it's really hard to transfer what you learn to practice unless very intentional things happen in between, right? And a couple of those things are opportunities to practice, to rehearse out of the action, right? What are you going to say? What are you going to do? What might a child respond? Anticipate those children responses. Having that opportunity to do that while you can think and you're not being cognitively taxed, because oftentimes when you're in the classroom and there's so many sounds and so many children that need your support, you go on autopilot, not because you don't want to be intentional, but because that's all that your brain has the capacity to do, right? And so it all depends on the type of intervention support that you're being provided, right? The opportunities for feedback, the honing on the specific practice. Are you working with a coach? And so if there is very intensive support happening like that, where they have lots of those cognitive and behavioral supports that we know through evidence are really, really effective, you can see big gains pretty quickly. But if what's happening is a teacher is going to a workshop and they're, learning about a lot of things that maybe aren't exactly relevant to their context, probably not going to see a lot of change. If there's really high turnover, you're probably not going to see a lot of change, right? And that's why I also talked about the importance of that culture, because we see that when programs adopt the culture of interactions, you tend to see more retention on the part of teachers. So if teachers stay, there's more opportunity for them to get better. Otherwise, you're constantly sort of measuring a baseline. So that was a long way to say it depends and not give you a very straightforward answer. But happy to chat offline if you want to talk more about what you've already tried and what could be more effective to get you there faster.
Well, it was a little bit of a trick question, Veronica, because I knew the answer was it
It
depends, but I think
depends.
it's an important message, right?
Yeah.
It's a really important message for people to
Yeah.
understand. I think I'll go to you, Patricia, on this next question, which is really about what recommendations would you make for someone who's working to roll out LENA in class and outcome monitoring, across multiple programs? They name specifically like 20 plus programs with a variety of culture, curricula, approaches such as Montessori, Reggio, etc. And I think the question really is anchored on how do you address all of the diversity potentially in programming when you're trying to roll out LENA in class? Maybe you and or Alicia to answer that for.
Yeah, and so we have Head Start, we have community partners, and we're in very different communities. I'm in Albuquerque, which is kind of central New Mexico. We're in northern New Mexico, which has a very different kind of feel when you go up there. It really boils down to those initial conversations of communication. It really, really does. And one of the first times that I rolled this out to people, like, we're going to do this. I talked about what do we want for our children. And so once we kind of tied it back to our strategic plan and our goals, once we did that, it really did align really nicely. We don't have a lot of coaches. We have two coaches. And so there's no expectation that everybody's being coached at the same time. But what we did say is everybody gets coached. Everybody gets LENA. So I don't know if there's a magic tool, a secret sauce to this, but it really was about, we started from the top and started talking to people about LENA. We started rolling out some of our results immediately. We talked about the importance of because we had external funding, we could hire an external evaluator. We started talking about some of those results immediately. And so it immediately piques some interest. And so those were a lot of those kind of critical pieces. We did develop a plan, just like I think most Head Start programs, most programs kind of like with the timeline, we had an action plan. Let's see how it rolls out. Constant communication with those teachers. How's it working? What's not working?
And Dominique, I'll just add, provider buy-in is so important. You know, when we first did LENA, it was a small grant in South Lake County, and we only had room for about 5 to 10 classrooms. It was super small. And that was the best for us because we were new to LENA ourselves. And then we did it again. We did, you know, we were shooting for 200 classrooms. So we kind of jumped on board once we kind of knew what it was. But at the very beginning, it was provider buy-in, it was teacher buy-in, it was hands-on, our team hands-on with providers, those conversations about what it is and talking through what it's not. I think so many times these programs are kind of thrown out there and providers don't really understand what it's about or what the intent is going to be or what the impact's going to be. So it's just so important to have those conversations ahead of time, get that provider buy-in. Those directors, those owners will get that teacher buy-in. That's important. And then, you know, go slow. Pilot programs are fantastic. It's a really way to gauge the provider interest. And then use those providers who are excited about it to help get more providers excited about
There
it.
you go. Well, I love that. I would probably just share with whoever posed the question. The beauty of class and Lena both are that they are curriculum agnostic. They are programmatically agnostic. Whatever your creative vein is and how you decide to roll out programming, you could be a STEM focused Montessori. It really doesn't matter because these tools are agnostic to all of that, which I think is really important as well when you see so much diversity across the network that you're working with. Last thing, ladies, let's get some final thoughts, right? So we're gonna do some closing reflections. While we've talked a lot about specific programs, I wonder if you guys could leave the audience with one piece of advice for prioritizing interactions in early childhood classrooms. And if you would give them a piece of advice, what would that be?
What I would say is that small everyday moments really matter. So that it can be anything from smiling to greet a child when they arrive, making an effort to use their home language throughout the day, genuinely listening and nodding like Dominique is doing, even while they share a story that provides more detail than you want to hear, because children sometimes do that. Taking the time to comfort them when they're upset, believing how they feel, right? Those moments might seem really small, but they are impacting those children's lives in such meaningful ways, not just today, but shaping their future. And that's the power and impact that educators have that I'm constantly in awe of and sometimes miss being in the classroom. And children deserve that every single day. So that's my takeaway.
I think it's wonderful, Veronica, and I'm going to ditto that, but I'm going to add to our administrators, directors, owners who are on the call, do that same thing for your staff. It's so important, right? So teachers are doing it every day, but adults deserve the very same time, the very same intentional conversation, the attentiveness, the listening to the details, the providing support, listening when there's a sad story. All of that, do that for your teachers too, because I think as adults, we also need those relationships to be uplifted and built and have these powerful moments every day because we can't have them every day.
I think the piece is that I often go back to is even at a time where our program, we are understaffed, but the time spent finding the right coach, that can't be underestimated because being a good teacher doesn't necessarily translate to being a good coach. And so I am very fortunate. Our coach, her name is Andrea Sills for Lena Grow. When we interviewed her, we asked her, we have an opportunity to really ask the questions that we want to ask. If she continues to be just this outstanding coach, and she set the tone because teachers talk. And once those teachers like, oh, Andrea's going to start working with me. No, it's all good. She's really good. She's non-judgmental. She's here to help. That was a key for us. But spend the time finding the right coach or coaches.
Wonderful advice, friends. Well, we are just about out of time. And I want to so graciously thank our panelists, Veronica, Leisha, and Patricia. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights. Thank you for your candor and your authenticity. And thanks to everyone who has attended this webinar. We're excited to share some great resources, including a research report and case study on how LENA has helped programs improve their class scores. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the newsletter at lena.org/newsletter and follow LENA on social media at LENA Early Talk. Likewise, you can find more info on class at teachstone.com and follow at Teachstone on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you, everyone, and have an amazing day.